Hello. Today the nursing profession is held in great respect, and rightly so, but you may be surprised to hear that this was not always the case. In fact, in the early Victorian era, nurses weren't very respectable at all. A very good example can be seen in Charles Dickens's novel Martin Chuzzlewit in the character of Mrs. Gamp. This nurse is blousy, sloppy, unreliable, untrained, and usually drunk. By the mid-Victorian era, however, thanks to the efforts of pioneers like Florence Nightingale, the nursing profession had started to become professionalised. And perhaps because of a consciousness of its previous poor reputation, real efforts were made to recruit young, respectable, middle-class women. Today I'm going to talk to you about two pioneering nurses who certainly come from this middle-class, moneyed background, but they also have unusually international origins. Annie Brewster was born in 1858 on the island of St Vincent in the West Indies. Her father was a successful businessman and merchant, and in the 1860s he moved the family to London and they settled in the affluent South London suburb of Camberwell near Grove Vale. Now, having said that nursing was keen to take on respectable trainees, their families were not always too impressed by their daughter's decision. Because of all the limited professions open to a woman, nursing was perhaps the most challenging and the most dangerous. So we don't know what Annie Brewster's father thought about her choice, but she did start training in 1881 at the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. Now, the Royal London was one of the most busy hospitals in the capital. It was in Whitechapel, which was one of the most intensely occupied, disease-ridden and poor areas of London. And she would have been kept very, very busy, not least because she found herself in the eye ward of the Royal London. She was obviously a very talented nurse because she became the ward matron. She managed that ward, and in fact so identified did she become with the role that she was simply known often as the nurse ophthalmic. Now, tragically, she died when she was only 43 in 1902 after an unsuccessful operation carried out in her own hospital. This devastated her colleagues. At her memorial service, a speech was given by one of the most famous living nurses of the time, Eva Lux, the chief matron at the Royal London Hospital. And she noted, when talking of her deceased and much missed colleague, that she'd combined those qualities of kindness and quick intelligence so necessary in a nurse. Annie Brewster's memorial can be found in the City of London Cemetery at Newham. Florence Oppenheim had a few things in common with Annie Brewster. Florence was born in 1881 to a family of Netherlandish Jews. Her family was also mercantile and well-to-do and middle class. And her nursing career, much like Annie's, took her right into the thick of things. But we know in Florence's case that her family were firmly opposed to her choice of career as a nurse. In fact, when she left school, she ended up staying at home with her mother, cooking in Canterbury, Islington, until she was 29, when she finally persuaded them to relent. She started training in 1911, and she ended up, of course, embroiled in the First World War. In 1915, she sailed off to the Middle East, where she was to serve as a nurse in hospital ships, dealing with terribly injured men who'd been serving on the front in places like Gallipoli. We know that on one of the ships she served, there were almost 1,000 patients and just 10 medical staff. After this, she moved on to Cairo, serving in a military hospital there. And even after the armistice, she continued working in the Middle East. There was plenty of work, including Palestine. And of course, she survived the Spanish flu, which ripped through the world, killing many of her colleagues. In fact, Florence only returned to London in 1919. At that point, probably much to her parents' relief, she finally married. The man she married was a widower and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and she becomes Florence Greenberg. Now, anybody over the age of 40 or 50 who is Jewish and British will probably recognise that name. She started writing a cookery column for her husband's newspaper, and in 1931 she published a book, Florence Greenberg's Jewish Cookery. It's a classic of the genre, and one of the things that's really remarkable about it is it's an Anglo-Jewish cookbook, because she also writes for Jews who've had to move to London. It contains British recipes. During the Second World War, Florence also helped the War Ministry to teach Jewish housewives how to deal with rationing. But she never stopped being a nurse. She was one of the founders of the Jewish hospital. And she was also involved in helping to design and equip nurses' hostels, because she said, quite pointedly, that she'd actually had the experience of having to live in them. Unlike Annie, Florence Greenberg lived to a ripe old age, dying in her late 90s in 1980. And when she was asked about the secret to her long life, she said it was being useful. The City of London continues to have very strong links with hospitals and nursing. And just this year, we welcomed our newest company, our newest guild, the Company of Nurses. And I do like to think that both Annie and Florence would have joined their number had they still been alive today. Many thanks for listening. Stay safe.